Communication is the key to any healthy relationship. And in this next video, we're going to go over some parts in communication, how we effectively communicate in a relationship to keep it healthy and thriving. And with my guests, we're going to be having conversations, some laughter, some stories, and our own personal experiences to help you effectively communicate and grow. And this title, we're calling it Talk It Out, Unlocking Healthy Relationships Through Effective Communication. Well, welcome to another episode of Living Fully Fit with Coach AJ, and we're going to be doing a segment on communication and relationships in particular. And we're going to look at how we can build healthier and better, stronger relationships through effective and healthy communication. Because in my experience and opinion and what I've observed and seen in my own life and other people's lives, when you really develop that communication skill, you see your relationships thrive in a much better paced environment. You see it thrive in so many different elements because you're able to communicate effectively and connectively. So I have a special guest. Had her here before, my beautiful fiance, Jessica. So she's going to be going over some questions and bringing up her experience too. And we're going to be sharing kind of our story. What makes our relationship so healthy and thriving is, basically how we communicate and what we've learned from our past and our present and what we do currently and how it can help you as you're navigating through communication and building healthy relationships. And the title of today's podcast is Talk It Out, Unlocking Healthy Relationships Through Effective Communication. And we're just going to be going over this theme of highlighting importance of communication in building and maintaining healthy relationships. What does that look like? How does it sound like? Things to be aware of, things to be cognizant of as you're communicating, as you're trying to navigate through effective communication, and how it could benefit you in your relationships, and not just romantic relationships, any relationship, period. So we're going to be going over that. I'm going to be bringing Jessica in this because Jessica's background is not just, my fiance, but she's also has a background and she's a nurse. She's been doing psych nursing for many, many years. And so she has, some stories. I'm sure she can share that how effective communication helps in that element of not just in, relationships, but in your profession, but also dealing with psych patients and all that stuff. So starting our first part of the segment here is understanding healthy relationships. What constitutes a healthy relationship? So that's the first question. What constitutes a healthy relationship to you?
Well, that is a very loaded question.
Yeah.
I would have to say a healthy relationship is definitely built on respect and communication. So that in itself is going to drive a relationship either towards success or towards failure. So whenever we are able to effectively communicate with one another, in that sense, we're also respecting one another.
Yeah.
We know how to speak to one another. We know how not to speak to one another. And in turn, it's going to be either a great thing or a not so great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people assume that healthy communication is, well, we just get along, we're in love with each other all the time, and we have the feeling of healthy relation, the feeling of love. And I think people forget that really what helps build that foundation, because, I look at relationships as a foundation, you build the structure and everything that goes along with it. It's that trust. And you're not going to be able to build trust without communicating effectively, which I think you and I have done so well. I mean, Emma still asks me to this day. And for those who don't know, my daughter's Emma. She was on my last episode of our podcast. We did daddy-daughter segment. And she asks, us all the time, "Oh, you guys never fight?" And I guess it surprises her. And like, well, no, we don't fight. We have discussions. We have conversation. And I think that's been a very big thing for me, is that what's kept us so healthy and the stress level so down and the peace in our relationship is the fact that we talk things out. We have questions or maybe concerns, and we respect each other enough to have a conversation, And like for me, it's like it's taken years to get to that point where I have someone else who can do that with me. I'm sure you haven't always had that where you're able just to have a conversation when you have concerns and thoughts or whatever it is, or insecurities. So the question for you, in your experience in your past, what lessons have you learned from those experiences that have gotten to where you're at now?
Well, as we both know, I was married before. So I was married at the young age of 18, and I didn't feel as though it was too young. I always kind of knew what I wanted. But in that relationship, he was also in the military, so deployed multiple times. And I was in nursing school. And so it was kind of like we were just glorified roommates. We lived our own lives, came together to have date nights, things like that. That was pretty much the relationship. In that relationship, I don't feel as though we had a lot of serious conversations. I think that it was kind of just to go with the flow. Here's my roommate, here's my pal. That was basically my marriage until the last 3 years of it getting kind of destructive. But it wasn't until after my marriage had ended that I started dating this other guy. And it kind of went a little fast just because I was very confused.
Yeah.
I was married 9, 10 years and I had no idea how to be independent and on my own. And so, unfortunately, I jumped into the next relationship. And in that relationship, it was no communication at all. We drank a lot. And what ended up happening is he ended up cheating on me. He slept with a bartender that very well knew that we were together, which was very hurtful. So that was my very first hurt, and just another woman hurting me, but also another man. And I had never experienced that before. And what I learned from that relationship was that I definitely deserved better, especially after therapy. I learned that I deserved better, but also I learned how to communicate what I was feeling better. Because in that time, I was afraid that if I said the wrong thing, then he would be gone. Even though he wasn't the greatest guy, it was still an insecurity of being alone.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to lose the relationship I had, but I also didn't know how to communicate effectively within that relationship. I did great at work with my patients and, people that I worked with, but definitely not in my own relationship. So that relationship taught me that I needed to actually use the skills that I have as a nurse, and also bring that into my relationship when it comes to communication.
Yeah. Gotcha. So past experience kind of really kind of pushed you to learn that skill better for future relationships, which I appreciate. I get to experience the healthiness of that, and I think, for me, it's like I didn't have anybody in my past that was good at communication. I've been with people who just would talk down to me or talk at me, or would just argue or shut down. I've experienced that too, the shutdown thing where you're trying to have a communication, you have a talk, and they shut down, they move away, and they just kind of block you out. And then a month later, they blow up on you. You're like, where did this come from? Why don't you talk to me about this back then when it was fresh? Well, I've been stewing on it. Why are you stewing on this? What good does that do? And I've experienced that too. And, it's very frustrating and infuriating because you feel like helpless, like you can't do anything because you're trying to navigate the best way you can. And not to say I was perfect at this. I was not perfect by any means, but I think I was trying my best to try to at least have healthy communication, but it didn't happen because I had a partner that didn't want to communicate effectively. They'd rather be in charge and yell and dominate the conversation, or they just wanted to shut down and then let it boil up and blow up at me later, and then it just didn't do any good regardless. Um, so, I look at that and I experience that. So with you, you make it so easy to communicate frustration if I have them, which is very rare, or concern or thoughts. I can just share my thoughts with you. And even if it's a dumb thought, you don't make me feel like it's a dumb thought. I'm like, oh, well, have you thought about this? And that's a good way of doing it in a way that doesn't diminish my opinion or thought, but still helps me kind of navigate maybe, hey, maybe it's a better way, and I never had that, so the cool thing about being in a relationship with you is we've had very good conversations and discussions and ways of navigating through things, where I've been that for you and you've been that for me. And I think a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people don't have a partner who's willing to navigate those tough waters sometimes and those hard conversations that might be uncomfortable, but are essential to gain better understanding,
Okay.
So let's kind of move down the line here. So we talk about kind of just the healthier relationship communication, or past a little bit, give you a little context to our audience here. And really this whole segment's about healthy communication, effective communication. And I want to go into, the principles of effective communication here. One I would say is active listening. I think that's a big one. And for me, active listening to me is I am taking the time to listen to you, focusing on you, giving you the attention you deserve and the respect you deserve, not interrupting, not cutting you off, not diminishing what you have to say. That's what active listening is to me. So I would like to ask, what is active listening to you?
Well, active listening, that is the first part of active listening, but the second part is going to be as soon as that person finishes their sentence or their thought, just so that you are aware of what occurred or just wanting to double check, you say, okay, so what I'm hearing is this, and you repeat what the person has said. That way it does show, oh, wow, they were really listening. And it also shows understanding. Did this person understand what I said?
Yeah. So it's not just me listening to it and paying attention, but it's like, oh, so what you're saying is this.
Right.
It's like that.
Because you can look at someone directly in the eyes and appear as though you're listening. But inside your head, you may be thinking, oh, I need this at HEB or that. So there are times that it's just better off to go ahead and repeat what the person has said. That way it does show that you are intent to listen to them.
So can you give an example when someone doesn't active listen, and what does that do in your example, in your opinion? Because you've had exes in your past that weren't good at that active listening component. How did that make you feel, and what did that look like when
Well,
they weren't?
it makes people feel frustrated, not just me. I think anybody. It would make someone feel very, very frustrated that they're unheard and almost like I just wasted 5 minutes explaining my day to you for you to say, mm-hmm. And for that to be the reaction is very, very exhausting in itself. So, I mean, that's basically what it would look like, me expressing my day to you, and maybe that response would have been, mm-hmm. Or, if I know that you're not listening, then that's also very frustrating. If I can tell that you appear distracted or anything like that, it's more like, hey, I need to talk to you. So,
Yeah. And I think it goes both ways. I think you have to be willing to get that person's attention too.
mm-hmm.
If you know they're actively doing something to tell them something important and then assume that they got it, that's not fair either. 'Cause I've seen that happen. You see that in couples regardless, on both sides, where, the man will tell his stressful day and the wife's busy taking care of the kids and paid no attention to her husband, and vice versa. The man's sitting there watching the football game, his wife's telling him something important, and he's like, oh yeah, that's great, honey. And there's no actual acknowledgement or understanding of that. And I think what we do, and we're not just giving information out, we should be able to not assume that they're getting it,
Mm-hmm.
is to interrupt what they're doing, get their full undivided attention, and say, hey, this is important. I need to tell you something. Oh, okay. That way it's fair to them, because if you're behind me, let's say I'm on the couch right over here and I'm watching a movie and you just come behind me, you're like, hey, blah, blah, blah. Okay. You can't assume that I got that. It would be best to get in front of me, get my attention, and say, hey, I have something to tell you. Oh, what's up? Pause. And we can have a conversation, which I think a lot of people don't do very well, and that's the thing about active listening. It's not just, paying attention to you, but also the person who's conveying the message to get their attention. It's their job to get their attention too. It's both and. Otherwise, it's not all in just that one party. I think a lot of people assume that it is. Well, that person who's listening has to be, it's on them to listen. And yes, it's on them to listen, but it's also on the communicator to get their attention initially, at least. After that, if they're still being distracted, that's on them, because that's just disrespectful, or they're just, overly distracted, or whatever's going on in their life. That's on them. But initially, the communicator needs to initiate the communication in a way that grasps your attention at first. Would you agree?
I agree with you.
Yeah. Another thing about, principle of effective communication here I wrote down is definition and importance, defining what communication looks like, how we define communication. And you look at different kinds of modes of communication. There's that verbal communication, nonverbal communication. It says a lot. I used to tell one of my exes, it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. I tell Emma this, when Emma is like, had given me a little attitude, I wasn't rude. I'm like, maybe what you said wasn't rude, but how you said it was rude, so that's the thing about like, the way we communicate is so essential, can you expound on that as well?
Well, I mean, I think that most people will definitely, be more on board with hearing about kids, how they will definitely have that little sass in their mouth or something to that effect of, fine, I'll do it. I already did that. Just the way that they say that. I've had conversations with Emma on, if you have told her to do something and her response is, in a minute, then it's like, well, how can we change this? And then I actually like mimic her in a way and I say, Emma, I want you to listen to this in a minute versus, okay, Dad, just a sec. Like, which one sounds better? And she'll hear it then. She doesn't hear it as it comes out of her mouth.
Yeah.
And that's for a lot of people. Sometimes we
I
don't
think
notice.
that's most people.
It is. And, it can happen to anybody. Let's say we're waking up in the morning and how it takes me some time to wake up in the morning. So if you were to tell me something, I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
it could come off a different way. It could come off that I'm frustrated with you or I'm already irritated about the day. And that's not intentional. It's just that was the noise that came out of me at that time.
Absolutely.
And so it is very important to also look at communication in that sense of timing. Is this person just waking up? Are they having a rough day? Did they really mean to sound that way? So it does need to be worked on both parties, to be more empathetic about what's going on, but also very much so in charge of the person who is communicating to make sure that they try their best, that if they do say something or make a noise or look a certain way, that they're able to say, you know what, I realize how that sounded. This is what I meant. And I'm having a rough day and I didn't mean for it to come out that way. And so that's very important in communication.
Well, especially, if we're talking about effective communication being the foundation for healthy relationships, as with any relationship, what's going to help me as a better, future husband, better father. I look at aspects even in a work environment, employee environment, those kind of things. Being effective in your communication is going to help build that foundation of trust and relationship in every avenue, because then people are more willing to want to be around me. First of all, because no one wants to be around a person who's going to yell at them or snap or talk in a sarcastic way. And a lot of times, like you said, sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. I know Emma doesn't think she's doing it, but she is, and I think sometimes we're all guilty of this. Well, I didn't mean it that way. Instead of just saying, I didn't mean that way, it's like, oh, I'm sorry that you heard it that way. I did not mean it say it come off that way. Here's what I meant. I'm sorry. I'll work on that. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to do that. They just like, well, I had a bad day, or watch this how I sound. And I've heard this, especially in today's culture. Oh, well, this is just how I am. Take me as I am, or find someone else. Or what's that phrase? If you don't like what I have, you find someone less, or something. If I'm too much, find someone less. And that's I hate that phrase. It's like it takes no personal responsibility with that phrase. Well, if you want something, less, if you don't like what I have, if I'm too much for you, get something less. Well, it's just ridiculous, because then you're not taking any ownership. Well, this is how I am, this is how I'm wired, this is how I was raised, this is my experience. It'd be like, you allowing your trauma to affect our relationship. Well, this is why I experienced my exes, so you have to just deal with it. You're taking away all personal responsibility. Luckily, you don't do that. But imagine if you did, that wouldn't be healthy for our relationship, because then I'd be like frustrated, like, well, I don't deserve that. I'm not the one that caused that past. So we have to navigate through that. And I think a lot of people need to learn how to navigate through that healthy communication and not make excuses for why they are, why they say it, why the tone. Well, this is how I was raised. This is how my dad talked to my mom, or my mom talked to my dad, or whatever. It's an excuse. It's taking away our personal responsibility. And you said something real big, that there is empathy. Empathy is the biggest indicator of someone actively listening. Do you actually try to understand them? And I think for us, I think what's been great for us is that you and I are actively trying to understand each other. Even on days that are hard, and we're dealing with hard things and, triggers from our past, whatever, we still try to understand and have that empathy. And I think that's the key to communication is empathetic communication. How can I better understand you? How can I grasp what you're going through? And how can you grasp what I'm going through, what I'm trying to say, And again, it comes back down to that. It's about how you say it, not what you say, especially because that tone typically is an indicator of empathy or lack thereof sometimes,
Right.
And I think that's very important that we pick up those pieces of understanding of knowing how to communicate with our tone, our body language, I don't think, I don't think we've ever seen this where you and I are like, shut down. Typically we're very open when we're talking, because I've seen it, with people I've dated in the past and that kind of stuff. We're just like shut down. They're like, you can see it in their face. They want nothing to do with what you're saying. They don't want to hear it. They're stuck on their mindset and that's it. Their narrative is the gospel, and I think you and I have done very good about making sure we create eye contact. We're talking, we're not like shutting down body language wise either. Because I think that says a lot too. Eye rolling, those kind of things. Those components, display respect and empathy. And again, that active listening component that we're talking about here. Speaking of all other nonverbals, in your experience, what are some nonverbals that communicate understanding to you when you're conveying something important or powerful or emotional? What are some nonverbal communication that you want to see that display that someone's listening to me, someone gets me?
Well, what I would say to that is to know that someone's listening to you is that they do have that eye contact, or they're at least looking in my direction. As we have gone with the times, there's been some changes. There are a lot of people now that are very uncomfortable with silence and eye contact.
Yeah.
So in this day and age, I'll say, okay, if you're looking at me, or at least in my general direction, I will assume that I have your attention.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I just want to see that the person is maybe relaxed, whether their hands are in their pockets or just on their sides. A lot of people don't know what to do with their hands. I am one of those people that sometimes I have no idea what to do with my hands, and that's okay. But the thing that I don't want to see is the arm fold that just expresses that someone is closed off, or maybe that they feel anger. I don't want to see that if I'm communicating with someone, just because it would tell me that they're not interested. I've angered them in some way.
Yeah.
Unless it's cold and they say, hey, I'm cold. If someone communicates that, that's completely different. Whenever I am having a talk with someone, I do enjoy whenever they do speak back to me to let me know that they've understood something, or maybe they haven't understood something. Or if I have something serious to say and I don't know, it becomes saddening. Someone who just reaches out just to touch you or something like that.
Yeah.
A touch of some sort would tell me that, hey, they are listening to me and they are gathering information.
It's those little subtle moves that help, I think. I think people overcomplicate communication sometimes.
Mm.
And really it's the simple things that display empathy or lack thereof. It's those little small little acts and gestures a lot of times.
Yeah.
Our facial expressions, those mean a lot too. How we express our eyes and our mouth and our eyebrows and our frowns or our RBFs, all those things. Those things, say a lot. And that's where, it's funny. I had a friend who had an RBF and he was like, well, this is my face. I can't help my face. So I'm like, but you kind of can actually. And I always hate that excuse. Well, this is just the face I've always have an RBF, but that makes you unapproachable. I look at like an experience of, work environment. I've had bosses who I was intimidated by just because of their face. They might have been a great person, but they look so unapproachable because they look angry all the time. When you look angry all the time, how can you communicate anything? And if you look PO'd 24/7, and that's the thing is we have to be very cognizant of our facial expressions, how we present ourselves. If our arms are always closed, like you said, if our face is always just disheveled and we're looking angry all the time, it's hard to communicate with someone. It's hard to be open with that person, especially. But let's move on here. So, overcoming some common communication barriers. I want to kind of look at how we identify common barriers of communication. what those are. Like how do you identify some common barriers? Like what are some common barriers for you in communication, like from your past or even people you know now?
I would have to say a lot of that experience is going to come from working in hospitals. I mean, barriers can go anywhere from a language barrier, having patients that are from other cultures or things like that. There may be other barriers that I may not
Mm,
understand. And so, first off, a language barrier. If there's something going on there, English isn't their first language, that can be difficult. I would also say for people that just come from an unsafe home, coming into a hospital, they also may feel like that's very unsafe. And so they don't know how to communicate with me because their whole life in their home has just been mom and dad yelling or whoever their guardian is
yeah.
yelling. And so they don't know how to communicate either. And so let's say something happens on the unit and it's not good. So they get, I'll just say, quote, in trouble because, of course, there is no trouble on the units that we can really have disciplinary action with. But let's just say we have to talk to a kid about maybe saying something mean or hitting another patient, something to that effect. The way that we speak with them, how we don't yell at them, how we're very calm, how we get them to critically think of how could we have managed this better. A lot of the times it's a shock to them at first. They're like, whoa, you're not yelling at me. I'm not going to my room. I'm not getting a spanking. Um, what is going on here? And then they shut down. It turns into the arm folding. It turns into just complete quietness, looking at the ground. They have no idea what's going on. And so I would say a barrier would be just people not experiencing communication with love, just being able to speak with people in a loving manner versus always being yelled at.
Hmm.
Then I also look at my friendships. As an adult, having friends is a little bit more difficult. At least I feel that way. So I do have a friend, she's a psych nurse practitioner. She's got kids. She has all these things going on. And sometimes we don't catch up until maybe like a month later. We used to have lunch all the time and then life got busy. And so it's kind of, we'll make sure to text each other, hey, just let you know I'm still here. I'm sorry that I haven't been the greatest of friends here, but I am still here. Let's catch up on this and that. And just being able to understand that, especially as adults, and communicating that instead of, just not communicating with someone. And then that other person is thinking, wow, I haven't really heard from this person in a while. And then they try to reach out, but that friend may not have the greatest explanation or even respond to you at all.
Well, I've noticed that when you're not communicating those kind of things, people create assumptions in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wonder, did I do something wrong? Did I offend them? And it creates this whirlwind. It destroys a relationship further when
Right.
you're not communicating those kind of things. And that's why if your life is busy, just communicate. It's like, hey, I'm sorry I haven't hung out with you in a while. Here's why.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. You know what? Just let me know when you're available again. And I think as adults, we lose that. I don't know what it is. We just lose that skill of effective communication for some reason, of just being honest, especially being honest. And I think it's okay to be honest, say, yeah, you know what, I've been very busy or I have been very distracted or whatever it is. And yeah, you don't have to always go into great depth and detail on it, but just be honest enough to say, you know what, I've been busy. I'm so sorry. Family, kids, work, whatever. I think people will respect that more, and maintaining, developing, good, relationships like friendships and everything, especially. That's why I think, communication, you look at every kind of relationship from dating to a friendship to family, it's that communication of, here's why I'm not available, or here's why I'm not able to come to the reunion, or those kind of things, instead of just blowing it off and hoping it'll go away, which I think a lot of us and adults, we do that. We say we're confrontation, but no one's really is confrontation. No one wants to confront the elephant in the room and have that kind of conversation, unfortunately. They'd rather just avoid it and hopefully, well, maybe they won't say anything. Maybe they won't ask. And then when you do ask, you're like, well, where'd that come from? Well, you knew it was coming.
Right.
You've experienced that, where you've asked friends, hey, what's going on? And they act all surprised. What are we talking about? We're friends. No, we haven't seen each other in months. What are you talking about? Where'd you go? Well, life is busy. And then they tell you everything and just vomit everything on you, and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa! I just wanted to know what was going on because I miss hanging out with my friend, and they get offended because you're asking about it, and it's unfortunate. I see this so often. I know in our conversations, you've dealt with that with some friends and even family and everything, myself too. I have friends, I were friends at the beginning of like my Army career. I don't hear from ever. I used to be the one reaching out to them all the time, say, hey, how's it going? I miss you. And then after a while of them not reciprocating, it's like, okay, I guess, it's just a one-sided thing, unfortunately.
Right.
But it boils down to communicating those facts. You know, looking at overcoming other barriers. You mentioned, language. What's funny is a while back I tried to date a Hispanic gal. She had a thick accent, and she already we had a few dates, but she got in a fight on our second date, and I'm like, well, that's a red flag. But part of it was like the language barrier. It was just like this. I said something I thought was funny. She took it the wrong way because she didn't realize it was a joke because of the language barrier. And she was so offended, and I think we don't realize that sometimes about language barrier, but also cultural things, I mean, even South versus North, Pennsylvania, Texas, California, whatever like that. There's different cultural things that we don't understand. And we say something and someone might get offended. And that's where we have to have a little bit of understanding and give people a little bit of grace too, I think, when it comes to those, barriers like language or culture, which I think people don't. They just say, well, they didn't get it because they don't understand me, this is here's why I said, I don't know why they're upset. Well, you have to understand where they're coming from, but the other receiving hand also needs to have some grace and understand that people aren't out to get you, you know? Um, I remember my buddy, Filipino friend of mine from when I was in my church days, and we were doing the whole mama joke stuff, yo mama, and what was that one from Friday? It was like, it's so good, it makes you want to slap yo mama, that little thing. And he thought it was hilarious, and so he was talking about it on the phone with one of his other friends. His mom overheard it, and she got so offended. And you want to slap me? You want to slap me? Is this what you want to do? And I'm just like, oh dang! He told me the story. We were all cracking up because I didn't think his mom was so offended, but it was that language barrier. She didn't understand that this is a running joke in America,
Poor thing.
slap your makes it so delicious you want to slap your mom over it, and she was so offended, but he was like, Mom, it's a joke, it's not funny." And that's just a funny story of, we look at communication barriers. But I think with communication barriers, we have to be cognizant of that communication, but also, again, it's not all on the communicator. It's also on the receiver. They have to, if you've been in America a few years, you have to quite start understanding some cultural things too, and not just take offense to everything too. I think it's both sides. One person needs to be sensitive, the other person needs to be less sensitive.
Right.
Both and. It's both and of there. So here's a question. What is the importance of patience when navigating through difficult conversations?
The importance of patience. Well, I think that whenever we have really hard conversations as people, as soon as we hear what has been said, if we already are getting defensive or anything like that, we immediately want to jump into it and defend ourselves and not give that first person the time to fully express their full thought or their full feeling. And so whenever we aren't patient enough to listen to everything, it's just going to cause an argument in itself. So I think that we all just need to take the time to learn how to be patient and to learn how to fully listen to what someone has to say, which is why a lot of the times in the psychiatric wards that I worked in, if kids were having issues with one another, we would definitely sit down. I'd have one of those little sand timers or something like that. They would have 5 minutes. The first person would say what happened. And, we had some ground rules. You can't call anybody names. You can't say anything mean. I just want the facts. What happened? How did this make you feel? What are your feelings? And then after that timer was done, then the second kiddo got to go. And they had the same rules. They needed to have the patience to sit there, listen to what this person had to say. And that's how conflict resolution works. We need to be able to sit and listen to the full effect that something has had on someone in order to understand where they're coming from, express how it also made us feel, and then be able to move on from there.
There we go. So based off of your experience, not just in the psych ward and everything, working there in a psych hospital, but even in relationships, especially since that's what we're talking, especially, what would you say are some techniques and tools you've learned on effective communication, especially in the side of relationships here?
Well, from the side of relationships, I would say that I have learned not to come at you in some sort of an emotional way. So if I have questions, it's more like, hey, babe, I noticed this. Can we talk about this? I guess an example would just be, if I have any questions, let's say maybe you're sitting next to me and you're on Facebook or something, and I see that you have a friend that's a female that has commented on something. And, I do have insecurities from my past still, so I do work on those myself. But in that scenario, if I have a question on who is that girl, there are a lot of women that will go, who is she? Just in that exact tone. Is that your other girlfriend? You know, that is what happens. And trust me, there are times that I have
Is
that
that
in
what
my
you
head.
want? Is that what you like?
Yeah. And sometimes I'll admit I have that in my head too. Someone's calling you. Oh, it's probably his other girlfriend. We have to learn not. We have to learn not.
Thank you for not doing that.
Yes, we have to learn not to allow that to come out. But instead of the catty remark, I see that, I glance over. Oh, hey, babe, who's that? Just in that same tone as well. And then you are always very great about this. Oh, this is so and so. We went to high school together, or this is one of my old youth kids, or whoever it is.
Yeah.
You're not hiding who it is. You're saying, this is who it is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay then. And then we move on with life. So just being able to communicate with you in a way that is not attacking you head on. It's trying to figure out what's going on so that you feel safe enough to speak with me about it.
Yeah. And ladies, pay attention here. Honestly, here's the thing. If you want honesty and transparency from your significant other, and this goes not just ladies, but men too, anybody. But you see this more with ladies, honestly. Let's be honest. You see this more with women and their significant other of coming at them like that, like you mentioned. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you go to them with calm, peaceful questions that make sense, not like, is that your girlfriend? No, it's like, hey, who's that? When you come to them with that kind of tone and respect, they're more inclined to be openly transparent and want to tell you everything because they have nothing to hide. Unless they do. I mean, that's a whole different story. But let's say they're a good guy or good gal. Again, if you come at them in a way that's respectful and communicative and understanding and empathy, that's the biggest one, then they're more inclined to share their life with you. And guess what? You avoid any future argument or misunderstanding. Because again, it's all about how you say it, not what you say. Because you can say the same thing with a different tone. And I'm like, geez, babe, but I'm just swiping on Facebook here. Here, look, but gosh, snapping at me. And what that tends to do some people too, they get defensive, and then that creates even more controversy. Like, what are you trying to hide? Why are you getting defensive? Well, they're being defensive because you're attacking them. That's why.
Right.
And that's the thing is like, if someone's being defensive and you're like, if you ask me like you always do, just, hey, what's going on? What do you want? Then yeah, I can say, what's going on here? But if you come at me at the attack, you can't expect me not to be defensive. That's the thing is like people will say if they're being defensive, they're probably hiding something. Not always. If they're being defensive because you are attacking them, you can't honestly be surprised they're being defensive. If you come on the offense, that person's going to be on the defense, regardless if they're innocent or not. Regardless. It's because it's a natural mechanism in the human brain. You come attack, I want to defend,
Right.
But if you come at an angle of understanding but curiosity, then I'm more inclined to let my guard down and say, oh yeah, it's this. And I think that's what makes it so easy. If you would come at me in a different angle, I think we'd be having different conversations, or not conversations at all, more like arguments.
Right.
And that's why I tell Emma is that, the reason why we don't fight is because we talk, we communicate, we have conversation. Now, the question I have for you is, did you learn this or were you always this way and then, that other guy messed it up, and then you had to kind of relearn this skill again?
I don't feel as though I ever actually had this skill in a relationship.
Mm.
I had the skill with my job, but I never felt like I needed it in a relationship. I didn't feel like I needed it actually until you and I got into a relationship. And that's only because I knew that I came from a very unhealthy relationship and that I thought I was healed whenever we met, which was a question you asked me, do you feel healed? I was like, oh yeah, I'm perfect. I'm fine. I went to therapy. And then lo and behold, no one ever really warns you about the healthy relationship because everything that you do sometimes feels like a trap, feels like there's a hidden agenda back there. I know that there's not. I mean, coming on 3 years, I would hope I know the difference by now.
Yeah.
But, there could definitely be times in the beginning when I was like, oh, well, is this a trap? And so I did have more questions that I wanted to ask. And so I was like, well, maybe I need to do it in a different way because I haven't experienced this
Yeah.
before. I need to be able to effectively communicate with you in a way that makes you feel safe and not in a way that makes you feel as though you are paying for the mistakes of my ex.
Fair enough. And I appreciate that. For me, I had to learn through, and like I said, I wasn't perfect at communication. I would get caught up in the fighting and the back and forth yelling thing. I've had to unlearn things. When I was younger, I think I was great at communication when I was younger. But I think being in an environment where you're defending yourself all the time, then that's all you know. So it took a couple of years of, going to therapy, but also just kind of unlearning those habits. And I think the Army for me has helped me be more of an effective communicator in relationship because, you're dealing with people in close quarters all the time in the Army. So you have to communicate very effectively. Otherwise, you burn bridges very quickly. Especially my profession doing HR in the Army is that, you can burn bridges quickly and it carries you throughout your entire career if you burn those bridges. That's why being an effective communicator is so essential. And I've learned that in my personal relationships. And so I've been able to carry that into like relationships like ours of, transparency is a big one. Transparency is a type of communication. I think people assume it's not, but it really is. You don't have to say a lot to show a lot. Being transparent is communicating to you that you can trust me, and vice versa. Because if I am hiding something, if I'm being selective of what I share with you, then what that does, it's communicating to you, you can't trust me. There's something there.
Right.
And I think, especially coming from your past, that's why I've been even more transparent with you because I want to make sure that you're able to heal from that and not question, what's the motive here? What's Age trying to pull here? Is he love bombing me? And I think after 3 years, I don't think anybody has the energy for love bombing 3 years consecutively without some other weird things showing up. Because usually people who love bomb are narcissistic, and their narcissism will eventually show. They can't keep love bombing 3 years in a row. That would be
No,
very impossible.
it's generally about the 6 month mark.
Yeah,
You will
typically.
see that love bomb start to fade away and those true colors come out. And by the full first year is when you'll really know what they are.
Yeah. Well, what was funny is the girl I dated before I met you, she accused me of love bombing. And she only accused me of love bombing after we broke up because I wasn't willing to take her back. Well, you love bombed me. I'm like, I did? I would have been consistent the entire since you met me, but okay, you know, but she also wasn't very good at communicating her feelings. She would just vomit all her feelings at once. You're like, whoa, where did this come from? And, well, I'm dealing with all this. I'm feeling all this. I'm like, okay, cool. But hey, let's deal with it as you feel it. And luckily, I think you've done this or done a really good job at doing this. We deal with it as you feel it. As the situation happens, you might process it like a little bit, a couple hours, and then you're like, hey, earlier today when you said this, it made me feel this way. Or earlier when this happened, it made me feel this way. Can we talk about that? Yeah, sure. Let's talk about it. And we'll talk about it. We'll navigate it. And I don't think we've ever had a conversation where it's gone south. It's always kind of like once we talk it through, we're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, moving on. Which I think honestly, most people they did that kind of style of communication, they would find themselves in the same place. Not saying we have it perfect. I just think we're blessed and we have similar personalities in how we communicate. We both are very good at effectively communicating our feelings and thoughts and processes and and insecurities and those things, fleshing it out without raising our voices, without cussing at each other. I don't think we've ever cussed at each other.
No.
Or call each other names or those things. And that's the thing about communication is you can do amazing communication without yelling, screaming, cussing, and whatever. And people will make excuses all day long and say, well, it's because I'm emotional. Okay, you could be emotional without cussing at that person or belittling them. You can be upset without doing these things X, Y, and Z, because all it's going to do is just destroy whatever you're trying to build.
Well, and that's a big reason of why, if something does occur and I sit on it for a couple hours, it is so that I can process it, so I can feel my feelings and then express them as a matter of fact. Because especially as women, we're very emotionally driven. And so I don't want to be reactionary to every little thing in life.
Yeah.
I take a situation that occurs and I sit on it and let my feelings feel my feelings. And then I think about it logically. And that way I'm able to communicate with you without yelling, crying sometimes, or name calling, anything like that. I'd rather be able to communicate again to a point where you feel safe and don't shut down, because I want answers. So I'm not going to communicate to you in a way that's going to make you not give me answers also.
I appreciate that. I say this, I think I've told you this before. Feelings aren't facts. Feelings aren't facts. Feelings come from real things, but feelings in themselves are not facts. And that's why, like you said, it's good to process the emotion, allow yourself to feel it, in a healthy environment,
Right.
and then pray, meditate, think, process, and figure out, why am I feeling this way? And find the root of it, and then have the conversations. Like, start getting some logic into it. You can't be all logical and be a Spock. You can't do that. And you can't be this emotional puddle either, because the emotional puddle doesn't get you anywhere either. You're just a puddle. So that's where you have to have that good balance of logic and emotion, let them come together and come to a solution. I think that's what works really well with us, is that we both do that. We think things logically, not just all emotional, but not just all logic. So if I came at you logically all the time, 24/7, you would think I'm cold and callous.
Right.
And vice versa. If you only came all emotional all the time, it would be very impossible to have good logical and concrete conversations that led us to something actually tangible. Where I think, a lot of people, and that's why they have a lot of issue in their marriages and dating relationships, and are bumping heads all the time with fighting and not developing that good, healthy communication style for a relationship, is because they're not, looking at both feelings and logic and combining the two and trying to find a middle ground there.
Right.
So before we close and everything, so here's some questions to kind of, help our audience, especially. What are some things that we do that you can suggest to others to help them navigate their relationships and to build a healthy relationship?
I think that something that we do is, again, just being very transparent and honest. Again, with my insecurities and me growing from them and things like that, I will ask you, oh, who's that? Who are you talking to? If you're on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, I'm sure that it can get annoying. We also had that talk about, is there something that I do that's extremely annoying to you, or something that I could cut back on due to my insecurities? And, just the other day you told me, well, you kind of ask that question a lot. And it's
the frequency of it.
The frequency. Yeah. And it's not that I'm asking, it's just I'm asking too much. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then just me also explaining to you, well, you just got back home from overseas. Maybe it's because I'm not used to seeing you on your phone again. Maybe I'm getting used to you being in the house.
Yeah.
Who knows? But I took that information and, in my head, I'm like, okay, I need to ask less frequently, because I know that there's nothing going on, but A, I'm a nosy person, and then B, I still have my insecurities. And so I think just us being able to communicate that with one another and having that safe space, knowing that I can ask any question at any time and you're going to give me an answer. I think that that's absolutely wonderful. No matter how, if the answer is going to be hurtful, you still give me an answer, but in a kinder way. But you always answer me, and I think that that is big. You don't lie to me about who people are, and you leave your phone around and I leave my phone around. And so just having that transparency in, hey, this is what I've been through in the past. And us both taking that into consideration of, oh, they've experienced this. So let me flip it around to make it a positive experience. And I think that that helps. Again, just us being able to communicate with one another without yelling. This, where our voices are now, is probably how we talk to each other
Yeah,
all the time.
daily.
So, I think that's the biggest thing with relationships, just being able to create safe spaces in order to communicate effectively.
Absolutely. I think, just it's all about the intent. I think with us, a good piece of advice for those listening and watching this, what you can gain from our, I guess, our experience in the last 3 years. And no relationship is perfect. We're both flawed, but I think what's kept our relationship strong and solidified is one, our relationship with God.
Right.
But with our communication style, it's having that understanding and thinking the best of the person.
Mhm.
I think that's what helps us the most is when you ask me a question, I know it's like coming from a place of accusation.
Right.
I know it's a general query. You're curious, and so when I answer it with that same tone of she's curious or she's triggered because of past. So my job is to help keep her safe and share that in a way that's not defensive either.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing is looking out and thinking the best of that person when communicating, that maybe when they're asking questions, they're not trying to just dig deep into your personal stuff. They just want to know because maybe they've dealt with something in the past, or maybe it's something not as deep. It's just they're just curious about your life. And I think that's what we have to understand is through effective communication, developing those communication skills in relationship, especially, it's essential that we think the best of our partners, of our friends, of our family, those things, don't think the negative right away, honestly, having that open communication, open forum where there's a safe place, like you mentioned, safety, it's safe, but being that transparent communication, being honest, sometimes being honest is very difficult. When you ask me a question, hey, well, what do you really think? I have to take a deep breath and make sure I word it in a way that doesn't hurt your feelings. Because again, you're a female. Telling you one way would be different telling Luke.
Right.
Luke's asked me, "Hey, Dad, what do you think about my outfit, son? You look like a hot mess. You look like a soup sandwich." Okay, that's probably what his reaction would be. If I told you look like a soup sandwich and you would not be happy. You would take it differently because again, you're wired differently. And so you have to be considerate of that. As men, I'm going to call them out the men here. Men were terrible about this. I've had to unlearn things the way I was raised and everything and learn new aspects and new ways based off just, seeing good men in my life and mentors, how they treat their wives, significant others and people and leadership and everything. And that way I don't have the excuse to, I don't know better. You always know better. There's always resources out there to know better. So that's one thing we have to make sure that we do is as we're developing relationships, as we're getting better at communication, as we're building healthy foundations, we can't use the excuse of I didn't know better. Oh, my past is triggering me. Those kind of things. We still have the ability, like you said, to turn the emotion off a little bit, think it logically, process, and then communicate. That's what I appreciate about you is that despite your past experiences with your ex, you don't allow that to be an excuse for you to just treat me any way, which way you want.
Right.
Which I've been with people that do that. Well, this is the way I was raised, or this is what my ex did to me, and this is why I do this. I'm like, okay, I get the why, but that doesn't excuse you from doing whatever you want to do and saying whatever you want to do and however you want to do it. And that's the one thing I think what's helped us, especially despite my past or your past, is that you and I have not let those past experiences define us and makes excuses for us,
Right.
So I think that's the one thing good takeaway for most people is to not allow those things to, excuse them from bad behavior, to allow themselves to learn from it and grow from it. And it still might trigger you. I get it. It's going to trigger you, but allow that moment to define you in a positive way to what not to do and how to do things the right way to build better relationships. So. Any closing remarks before we sign off here?
None that I can think of. I'm just very thankful and blessed that you and I are able to communicate appropriately. And I think that that's really helped our relationship and, anything that we go through or may go through with the wedding coming up. I think that we are on the right track for success, and I hope that others can definitely learn from our relationship style that we've kind of created with one another, and hopefully their relationships go in a positive direction as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jess, for being my guest again, which I'm sure will be, again, more future ones in future. You'll probably see my son on here, and then Emma again already wants to be in the podcast. But hopefully you, the audience, got something out of this, and really can help address your own communication style with your significant other or your family member or your friends, and see how those healthy communication styles, those ways to communicate, the hows and the whats, can help benefit you as you grow a relationship and as you build the bridge in the relationship. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching another episode of Living Fully Fit with Coach AJ. Hopefully today's segment helps you navigate through communication. And if you like this content and you want to support this content, this channel, make sure to subscribe down below to receive more updates on new content coming regularly. Also, go ahead and hit the thumbs up and like to support the channel. And if you know anybody who can benefit from videos like this to build a relationship or fitness or any other aspect of living fully fit, go ahead and share this link down below as well. And if you need some more advice, more questions about how to navigate healthy communications and how to navigate to have a healthier relationship, send me a comment below and I would love to answer your questions or concerns. Thank you again for watching Living Fully Fit with Coach AJ. See you next time.